All right, now we're joined by Candace Vaivadas, who's running for School Board District 5. So go ahead with a 2-minute introduction.
So I would like to begin by telling you how thankful I am to be here. I'm very excited. I am, unlike many of your candidates, a fourth-generation Seattleite. I have 100 years of family history here in this city, and all of us have attended public school. I have a unique perspective, still being young enough to remember some of the initiatives that have been passed to try and bring up the connectedness of our city from the north to the south, but also integrate. And I was a product of affirmative action and the busing program. I am also somebody who has lived in North Beacon Hill for the entire length of our family history. We are, our family home is situated in the Greenbelt, which is also known as the Jungle on Beacon Hill. And I have a unique perspective on not only racial diversity, but segregation and a lack of equal resources being distributed across the city that I think a lot of your candidates probably don't have. I went to what is now Beacon Hill International School, and I was one of 2 white people in my class for the entire time that I was there. The other person being my identical twin sister, so I tend to not kind of count her, but I do. And so I just really have a really deep understanding of what people of color in this city face, as well as immigrant families and first-generation immigrant children. And during affirmative action, I was then bused over an hour out of my neighborhood to Blue Ridge to go to Whitman Middle School. And the deep contrast between the north and the south end was so evident to me. The treatment of the children that were bused out there in terms of the lack of support that they had in integrating into a community that they had no idea about was profound. And the anger and resentment that they felt was very clear to me.
Great, thank you. So now we have 4 prepared questions that we're asking all candidates for school board, and they're right in front of you, and you may turn it over now if you'd like to read along with us as we read them aloud. These are 2-minute answers, and Elizabeth, we left off with you. Will you do number 1?
What specific actions can the school board take to help assure equal educational opportunities and help close the achievement equal opportunity gap? How do you see stopping the suspension, expulsion, prison pipeline that is affecting so many kids?
I'm sorry, is the time, okay, excellent. I am, in my other daytime work, I'm a private investigator specializing in police conduct and civil rights, and I believe that this process needs to start at the elementary level. We need to focus on bringing families in and helping support them in raising children that are kept up to date with their grade appropriate reading, writing, mathematics, etc. It is apparent to me that there is a huge effort to try and catch these kids up come the high school level, and at that point I don't believe that it's possible to do so. They have not instilled in themselves a sense that learning is to their benefit and that they have the support that they need both at home and outside school hours to succeed. I am also a tutor at Chief Sealth High School right now through University Tutors in Seattle Schools, which is a program at SPU. And I am acutely aware at this point that there's a huge gap that these children need support with. The remedial education that they get is not enough to support them, and if we were doing a better job at the beginning, we would be able to assure that they could really appreciate being in school and loving school at that point in their life. The school to prison pipeline is something that I see as a private investigator every single case I work in. And it is an overwhelmingly evident that the families that these kids come from are also feeling a lack of support. So I think it's really, really important that we reach out to them and find programs that help support them. I believe personally in teaching families the right way to support their children. And that can be a struggle for some who have never had support through their education, but we can do better, and I think we should do better.
Brittany, number 2.
How do you view the role of a school board member in terms of district governance? Do you believe it is the role of a school board member to advocate on behalf of the public with administrative staff?
I'm sorry, may I read that again? How do you view district governance? Do you believe in the role of school board member to advocate on behalf of the public with administrative staff? Do you mean administrative staff within the Seattle Public School Board system? Okay, excellent. Okay, I'm ready.
Go for
I
it.
usually start kind of when
Okay,
you start talking.
excellent, okay. I think that it is really, really important that we advocate for money being spent wisely, not just throwing money at problems. The more effectively we use money and the more we can advocate for the administrative body to support that effort, and especially in our schools, I think that we will have a much better success rate when it comes to the programs that children are supposed to be involved in. I think that we are supposed to advocate for the public in relationship to the Seattle Public School system because we are representing them, and they're our constituency, and their kids are supposed to be what matters most. And if there's a disconnect there, then we need to be the bridge.
Clayton, number 3.
What are your priorities? And how do you propose SBS finds the necessary funds to address the classroom and infrastructure needs of the district? Please specifically address the needs of Seattle's growing North Downtown population for an elementary school, as well as other neighborhoods in Seattle.
I think that I have seen through other work that I've done that schools are forced to build their own financial base through fundraisers every year, and I think that that's a gap that's trying to bridge this money deficit. However, obviously those neighborhoods and schools that have less money are not going to have the same amount of finances coming in to bridge that gap. I think for me a priority would be understanding that we cannot invest in facilities and technology that cannot also be used and aren't reflective of the technology that children have at home. Throwing more computers and fresh computers at schools when children don't have laptops at home to do homework that they're expected to do on these computers is, I believe, angering, as I was one of those children. My mother was a single mother. We had no money. My mother went hungry often so that we could have food, and the idea that she had money to afford a laptop so that I could do, coding or STEM work was just not within the framework of my world, and I think a lot of children feel that way. For the north part of downtown, obviously as a traditionally urban sector, I think that this is a really hard place to find space, especially safe space for children to be going to and from school. It's something though that I think is necessary because I believe an urban experience is much different from the experience of say North Blue Ridge and the North End in Ballard. We should be supporting those children to understand that what they will face on a day-to-day basis, commuting to and from a downtown space, is going to be very different, and they will need the support of people that understand that, especially with our growing homeless population and things like that, that potentially put them at risk. And I think that for me, one of the things that I think money needs to be reassessed in terms of how it's being spent. I'm out of time. Shoot. Okay.
David, number 4.
What do you think the district's testing policy should be?
Well, that's a loaded question. I believe you won't be having children that succeed in testing if you aren't teaching them with subject matter that they are actually interested in learning about. If you're teaching solely to a test, oftentimes that test is made to try and not have any favoritism showed, and so it's very bland and very boring, if I may be frank. Teaching kids the information that they need to apply in tests through means that are interesting, invigorating, and stimulating to them is the way that you can achieve the most. Personally, I would also like to share that not only have I had the perspective of going to public schools, but I also had the great, great privilege of being allotted a 4-year scholarship to the Northwest School for high school. And the testing experience that I had there was completely 100% different because we were encouraged to learn about things that we wanted to learn, and then we were encouraged to push ourselves to apply that information and that tactic of learning and approach to learning to the subject matter in the test. And I did great, but I have to be honest, I did not do great in middle school in those tests. And I felt like a prisoner, I felt like a number, and I felt like I was a butt in a chair. And if I wasn't there, then that was not their problem. And you know, I just think once I went to an environment that valued me and what I thought was important in terms of learning, I flourished. And I think we can give that to all these kids. I also had a great amount of arts classes, which I think really enriched my personal testing experience when it came to standardized testing, because it made me think outside the box. It made me express myself in ways that I would never have been exploring otherwise. So whether or not we're testing too much or testing too little, I think is a question that is hard to answer at this point in time. But I do believe that we're teaching testing in the wrong way.
Great, so now we'll open up to follow-up questions. These are one-minute answers, and we'll start with Brittany, then Jason, and Liz.
Can you please clarify and expand upon your comment on question 3 with regard to the relationship between students commuting to downtown and the growing homeless population?
Yes, so I had to commute through downtown when I was a student because I often took the public transportation through downtown and up to Beacon Hill. At one point I was caught in the WTO riots, and I believe that there was a huge absence of support for me as somebody who was having to commute through that space. And children need that. They need to know that they're safe and that if they have a parent who goes to work at 6 a.m., that there's support for them to go from point A to point B without being harassed, or in terms of what's happening downtown is not going to affect them in a negative way, because it was traumatizing and it affected me for weeks to come after that. I was tear gassed and I was in 7th grade and it was horrible. And things have not gotten better. Living in the jungle, I know that there's a huge movement of homeless people moving through these spaces, and kids need to understand that they're safe. And so there's consideration for that I think is being left behind.
Jason, then Liz, then Robert.
First, I just want to say thanks for stepping up and running. I think someone with your perspective and experience is needed more in public office. So thank you for stepping up and doing that. How are you going to win? How are you going to win this race?
So I've seen a lot of candidates asking for money, and I think that that is fundamentally wrong. I'm going to be going door to door, introducing myself, talking to people, asking people what they want out of their schooling and education system, throwing up signs on the roadside so that people can see me, which ultimately becomes trash, I think is a poor way to illustrate to a community that you care about them. And so that's how I'm going to win. I'm going to be knocking on doors. I'm going to be smiling, and I'm going to be talking to them.
So you're not going to raise any money?
I'm going to try. I mean, I will hope to raise money, but that won't be the main prerogative. My prerogative is going to be meeting the constituency and connecting to the community.
Cool. Thank you.
Liz, and then Robert.
Oh, boy. You know what? I think that I have lost my question.
You lost your question. Robert.
I've asked this of every candidate for school board so far. What is your personal view on charter schools? And if you were elected, would you uphold the current Seattle Public Schools policy of not authorizing charter schools in the city?
I will answer the last question first. Yes, I would. And I believe that it is a poor person who blames their tool, a poor workman who blames their tools. We should be improving what we have before we throw another option on the table. If you don't have a good enough school system that you think that charter schools are the answer, then charter schools aren't the answer. You need to fix the public school system.
David?
I'm wondering, and this part is reflected by your answer to our question number 1.
Yes.
But in Seattle Public Schools, in terms of advanced placement programs, you mentioned remedial programs. In terms of advanced placement programs, there's clearly a gap between white people and people of color and placement in the programs. And
Yes.
yet, we know from empirical research that a good educational outcome coupled with IQ is colorblind,
Indeed.
right? And that luck influences outcome. What are some specific strategies that you might bring in your role as a school board member to identify high IQ kids and support them and help them have a better outcome in terms of advanced placement and what follows that?
Yes. I would say, however, while IQ is a luck and a luck of the draw, behavior is something that you are imprinted with and that you come into a space trying to function as well as you can, given the limited tools you have. Oftentimes I see extremely smart kids who are treated very poorly in the system because their behavior is such that they are then deemed disruptive or, you know, impossible to teach or whatever. And I feel like that approach has been a great disadvantage for our people of color and children of color in this community. So I have seen also this effort to try and combine the lowest of the low with the highest of the high in the hopes of bringing the low up. I believe that that step, that thought process is flawed. You don't bring the lowest of the low with the highest of the high and expect them to make that jump. You bring the middle with the low, bring them to the middle, and then you put the high, the middle with the high, and make that jump. You don't skip that middle step. And that is how we will help those kids.
Okay. And I think Liz found her question.
I did find my question.
Yay.
It's more generalistic question.
Excellent.
But I just want to know, you grew up somewhat similarly to me. Growing up poor with a single mom, how important was it to experience arts and culture where it exists in the museums and the...
Oh. I can't even express to you the impact that that has had on the rest of my life. After university, I had never been further east in high school than Colorado, and I had never been on an airplane before. I was encouraged by my school to explore the world, and I ended up going to an American university in Switzerland and expanding my world exponentially. I was completely unprepared for how American I was and how distinctly isolated I had been in my experience of the world. And I think that it's really, really important to encourage kids to not only communicate with one another about the art, culture, and history of their places, but also to encourage them to see the world and support them in doing that. I know Chief Sealth has some great programs that are trying to do that, and I hope it is true in places like Rainier Beach that are even more impoverished. It is more important than ever, I think, for people of color to see the world and be exposed to that.
We have time for a few more questions. Clayton?
Sarah?
I wonder if you could tell us something about your feelings towards language instruction as
Yes,
a
I could.
tool
Yes, I could.
for transformation.
Well, firstly, I believe you are doing a huge disservice to students if you aren't teaching them the structure of their own language before you teach them a foreign language. I took French for many years, but I wasn't properly taught or not consistently taught the parts and structure of my own speech. I was a very good reader, but I couldn't necessarily break it down for you and how sentences were formed and all of that stuff. And once you get past a certain age, you don't go backwards, and you're expected to understand that. And I think that if you can give them the tools initially to then step into foreign language, they are going to be that much more willing to take it up and understand it better. Because if you don't understand how your own language is structured and what it means and the implications of that structure, you won't understand something like a romantic language that has so many layers to it. And it is, and so many nuances to it too. So I believe that foreign language instruction is very important, but not before understanding our own.
Thank you.
All right, we have time for maybe one more question. If anybody has one? Anybody? Going once, going twice. Elizabeth?
So in one of your responses, you talked about how both kids and their families don't feel like they're supported, and you were interested in programs to help support them. Can you expand on that? Types
Sure.
of programs?
Many of my friends who were people of color and from families of immigrants didn't have their parents read to them as children. And they came to school at a deficit, like kindergarten at a deficit. They were not spoken to positively all the time. Their parenting styles were taught in ways that were, as we would deem today, slightly abusive, if not very abusive. And I believe we need to support parents in understanding what they can do to set their kids up for success. Because it's not just about what teachers can do. Teachers are not able to be there after school, and they're not able to be there in the mornings, and they're not able to encourage them to read outside of watching TV or something like that. And I feel like parents they need that. They really need support. If you're not from a family that has ever thought that they could reach out, we need to reach out to them. And we need to tell them, look, we're here for you, and your kids are the future. Let's do everything we can to help you help them. Oh, I hate this 1 minute.
Everyone has it. Yeah.
Well, we're out of time, and enjoy your 30 seconds opportunity for a closing statement. So go ahead.
I just want you all to know that I will work so hard to help bring these kids that I see in myself and as a reflection of the environment that I grew up in, come up to the standard that we hope that they're going to graduate and be functioning adults in. Happy students create happy employees, create happy people in a community. And I don't think that we are doing enough to promote that in our schools. And I want to be the person to advocate for them.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.